Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Cynthia Alvarez, and this is the Grand Boulevard Coalition show. For today's topic, we're going to be getting into youth and gun violence, just kind of diving in a little deeper, the effects of gun violence on youth, their communities, why these things could happen, talking about some statistics and prevention as well, as always. But before we get into that, I just wanted to do a couple announcements before getting started. So I just wanted to let you all know an upcoming event that Healthy Living, our number one goal, is going to be a part of. There is an event in the Bronzeville community happening next Friday, July 11th, and that is Bronzeville Summer Nights. It is kind of a series that they're doing, so they will be having an event. I think it might be every other Friday. We'll have to double check. But for now, it's just going to be the 11th that we'll be participating in. So if you want to see us, if you want to be a part of the community and join and see what they got going on, there's going to be music, food, just a lot of entertainment and things for the family, people in the community to take part in. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. If you want more information on where that'll be, please check our Facebook, CAP Healthy Living. So look us up and just check back there for some further information on where you can find us. And then this won't be until next month, but we're having an event for Maddie Hunter. So I'll be sharing some more details on that as we get closer to that date. But yes, so getting into the topic for today, we will be talking about youth and gun violence. And we have talked about that a little bit briefly before, but just kind of giving a little bit more detail on how it affects youth, communities in general. And yeah, so the importance of it, why is it important to talk about this? As always, it's important just to kind of spread awareness on these things. As I'm sure it impacts a lot of communities, not just in Chicago, but everywhere else. Also, just thinking specifically on some things that happened in Chicago. We're going to get into that yesterday. Some things happened related to gun violence that we'll get into and we'll discuss. It's just important to kind of share resources, think about ways that we can prevent gun violence, statistics that kind of help us better understand who is affected and why they're being affected, and things like that. So kind of getting a little bit into some statistics. According to the Anne and Robert Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago, they found that firearms became one of the leading causes of death among children in 2020. So that's something that's really, important to think about, right? That just kind of shows that there's been a really big increase in gun violence, and it's affecting children. It's got to the point where that's the leading cause of death, right? So that's something that's very, very impactful, something to think about. And looking kind of at some Chicago statistics, according to the violence reduction dashboard, it's been updated to share statistics from people who were affected by fatal and non-fatal shootings starting from January 1st of this year up until July of this year. They had shared some interesting statistics. So they said 74% of Black Chicagoans have been victims of fatal and non-fatal shootings, and compared to 19% of Hispanic Chicagoans. So those are some, important statistics kind of to think more into our neighborhoods affecting us specifically. And it also shows that 18.7% of youth in Chicago have been victims of fatal and non-fatal shootings so far this year, right? So with that youth age, I believe it was ages 0 to 19 years old. So that's kind of, a big percentage of that. Thinking about children as young as, 3, 4, all the way going to young adults, 19 years old. So that's a big range. 18% is a kind of big number, especially since we're not finished with the year yet. it's important to think about how those numbers could increase, and just kind of talk about ways how we can prevent that, prevent it from increasing, basically. And there were some other studies that were found from John Hopkins School. They reported that Black youth in the U.S. have a gun death rate of 18 times higher than white youth. So that's something to think about also. Some other things, such as BradyUnited.org shared that students carrying firearms in schools has also increased 150.7% since 2020, right? So we kind of talk about a lot about the impacts of COVID, how that's impacted youth mental health, isolation, bullying, lack of emotional maturity, how that can kind of impact conflict. All of these things kind of go into youth who might end up dealing with gun violence. And obviously, it's not to say that, every student or youth who is going through mental health issues is going to be involved in gun violence, a victim or a perpetrator. It's just kind of something that is more likely to happen. And, we've seen some cases on the news, kids who have experienced bullying at school, who have had conflict with schools, even issues with the school in general because the school did nothing to help them when they were going through that bullying. While they were there, there was no repercussions that the school gave. So it's kind of that distrust and disconnect that the youth might have with their own schools, right? So that's something that can really affect these kinds of outcomes and situations. So it was really, really interesting just to kind of see that increase since 2020. They also said that they noticed, I believe it was more youth bringing in firearms in the later years. So between 2022 to 2023, they found more, of an increase in guns being brought in. And they mentioned that from 2017 to 2023, there were 275 guns brought to school by students under age 11. So that to me was something that shocked me a bit just because it's children under age 11. These are very young kids, very young youth who have access somehow to these firearms, right? And just kind of thinking a little bit about why that might be. There are certain states, I believe it was 26 states that did have laws such as secure gun laws that ensure people who own weapons, who own guns, firearms, to make sure they are safely locked away so that they are not easily accessible for other members in their family. As long as it is the person who bought the gun and who it is registered to, they should be the only person with access to that weapon, right? So having those laws are very important because if, in these cases, there are 24 states that do not have these laws in place, which makes it more easy for children to have access to these guns because there's no regulations, and things like that. And also kind of thinking about mental health, right? Some other ways that kind of tie into prevention, thinking about mental health checks for people who want to purchase a weapon, right? Also, FOID cards, which are cards that you need to register to be able to buy a weapon in the first place. There are a lot of states that don't require FOID cards for you to register to get one, to even buy a gun. There are some states where you can just go in and buy one, purchase one, and that makes it easy for youth to kind of get access to those as well, right? So, youth 18 and up, right? Because obviously you can't have a person younger than 18 going in and purchasing a gun, but it still affects youth who are around that 18 to 25-year-old range. So kind of thinking about how, some states, people have been advocating for mental health screenings, so that way you're able to know if this person is stable enough mentally to have a gun. Criminal background checks to make sure that they haven't been convicted or charged of any violent crimes. Kind of checking into things like that can really help prevent the wrong hands acquiring a gun. So those are a lot of things that people kind of want to advocate for and want to bring attention to. And they also did mention, besides the 275 guns that were brought in between those years, in that same year, they also mentioned about 2,000 and about 2,200 guns were found to be brought in by youth ages 12 to 17. So that's something else that is kind of shocking to think about too, right? And you have to think about, how these guns were potentially found. It's good that they were found because then, things could have happened that would have caused, either mass shootings or somebody, potentially getting harming themselves. And that's not even getting to statistics of youth who have self-injured with a gun or committed suicide with a gun. Even though it's not a large percentage, that's also something to think about in terms of making sure your weapons are secure if you do own a weapon, right? To keep them out of reach from your child who may be experiencing mental health issues that you might not know about, right? And that kind of is a lot of the cause that they find in mass shootings, right? So when it comes to mass shootings, they find the person who committed the mass shooting was suffering from a mental illness, and it wasn't addressed. The parents probably didn't know much about it or didn't pay much attention to it, wanted to kind of diminish the child's feelings. There's a lot of cases like that you can find, sadly, in the United States. Another way of prevention can be just to make sure that you as a parent, even if you're an adult, that knows of a child in your family from a loved one that you think might be experiencing mental health issues, just kind of making sure that you are creating a safe space for these children to openly share their feelings. Because sometimes kids don't want to share when they're having a hard time at school. Obviously not every child, but some children just don't want to bring it up to their parents. Maybe they just don't want to escalate it because they're scared that their bullies are going to find out and it's going to be worse for them at school, right? So just kind of making sure that parents and even people in the school administrations are doing more to protect their youth at their schools, to ensure that there are the proper consequences for bullies when they are found out. Having healthy discussions with the parents of those children who are the bullies and parents of the kid who's also being bullied, because those things have serious consequences, right? And like I said, we've seen that before in mass shootings. Even if it's a child, there are some cases where the child has already, or youth has already graduated from that school and they come back to that school and they don't know any of those students there, but they're there for the purpose of causing harm to the school in general, like just to kind of make a stance and show that they were done wrong by their school, that their school didn't do enough to advocate for them, and some of the kids hold that in, right? And kind of becomes like a grudge, something that builds up inside of them if it's not addressed, especially after they graduate. And as they get older, they hold these feelings and kind of have no healthy outlet to release those negative feelings. So that's kind of what goes with prevention, right? Making sure that your child has a safe space for them to have healthy outlets to release stress, anxiety, making sure they're seeing a therapist if they need one, to kind of go talk through their feelings if they don't feel comfortable talking to their parents about these things. A lot of that kind of goes into prevention as well, right? So yeah, I thought it was really interesting to hear about those statistics with the weapons that were found. Even other things such as making sure there are security at school, even things like metal detectors. I had a metal detector in my school, and it has its positives and its negatives, of course, because you want the environment to feel like a good school environment, but at the same time you want to make sure you're protecting the children at these schools, right? So yeah, so that was something to think about. And then, kind of talking a little bit about some relevant news to Chicago. There was recently a mass shooting here, um, uh, and it was in the River North area in Chicago. It affected 18 people who were injured. Four people, unfortunately, lost their lives. And it was, I believe, the demographic of age ranges. It was in the, people in their 20s, so young adults, youth, in Chicago who were affected by this. I believe I also heard that it was um, a, a big portion of the people who were injured were women. And because there was an event going on, so there was a lot of people around. So that was something that happened. It impacts the community. And even in that area, I believe they also mentioned that there was another shooting a couple years ago in that same area. So it kind of creates this fear in the community where people don't feel safe maybe going around these areas. They feel like they should stay away or maybe not go out as much, right? So just kind of making sure that if you do have youth, if you have kids, or even, your friends, your loved ones who are going out, just kind of checking in on them and making sure they're being safe, being aware of their surroundings, and with younger kids, teenagers, young adults, making sure that they're not out past specific hours in the later times, just to kind of help minimize that risk, but not kind of instill fear in them, right? Because we still want to encourage people to go out, have fun, do things, that bring people joy, self-care, hanging out with friends and things like that, but just making sure that they're being safe about it. So yeah, those are some other things that I wanted to bring up as well. And kind of thinking about those places that have found more guns in their schools. A lot of those states where they find more weapons in their schools is states that have little to no gun laws, right? So, people want to argue with gun laws that they might restrict people's rights. People are going to be unable to own guns anymore. But, a lot of the laws that people want to encourage are actually just going to try to make things safer for their communities, right? And we can see that with statistics with states that have little to no gun laws and how there are more they're at higher risk for mass shootings and shootings in general. So even with somewhere like Illinois, actually, they have just passed in the Senate. It's not passed as law just yet, but just this year in May, they passed something to make sure that guns are secure, kept in a secure location in the home so that children are unable to access them. So that was something to me that I thought was already in place here, but it's very interesting. But at least that is something that is getting passed now to hopefully prevent things, from happening in the future. There was a story that I did want to share related to this. When I was an intern at the clinic at UIC, the pediatric clinic, we actually did encounter, a family. This was in the news also around that time when a child had access to an unsecure firearm in their home and they had accidentally shot their sibling. I believe they were under the age, both of the children were under the age of 11, 12. So that was something that was really, difficult for us to hear and to know that that was something that had happened to this family. The child had that access to an unsecure weapon. So, because of these gun laws or lack of these gun laws, then that kind of leaves the risk of things like this happening, right? So, it's important to make sure families who are affected by gun violence are working with nonprofit organizations, making sure that you get in contact with local nonprofits in the area that want to help these communities and help the families that are affected, going into prevention, thinking about how you're able to, some organizations focus on gun violence specifically. So with these organizations, they're able to come in, work with the families, make sure they de-escalate the situations to ensure that nobody else gets hurt and kind of make sure that the families get the resources that they need, trauma counseling, because now there is the after effects, right, of gun violence, which is trauma, PTSD, anxiety, things that can really affect families and youth as a whole. So working with the families, making sure that they get the resources that they need, and just making sure that this, is the last that they're affected by it, making sure that they are able to connect with other family members that have gone through similar things, because it's really important to have people in your community that can relate to you, that understand what you're going through so that you feel like you're not alone. And just kind of connecting youth and more, thinking more about other prevention pieces is, making sure that youth have somewhere to go after school, that they're not hanging out late at night with the wrong crowd, or, at the wrong place at the wrong time situations. Just making sure that kids are in safe spaces, right, after school. Making sure that they, kind of connecting them to resources as well, making sure that they have, after school clubs, activities, even paid internships or paid volunteer opportunities or unpaid volunteer opportunities. I feel like it's something that's really important to help youth stay connected to their communities and want to protect them. And in turn, that kind of helps build a strong community, right? That can hopefully minimize the risk of gun violence there. If you have that strong community and strong sense of community, when you know the people that you live around, that kind of helps build that trust. And yeah, so thinking a lot about things like that, advocating for gun safety laws, by protesting, participating in marches, or even going to things like town halls or council meetings in your community, in your city, to make sure that your voice is heard, that you are advocating for the right bills to be passed, so that way it puts more of attention on these bills, so that way your representatives know, hey, like my community really cares about these bills, gun protection laws, and gun violence prevention laws. So yeah, thinking about things like that. And even, like I said, making sure you check in with youth at school, in your community. If you work for an organization that works with youth, focusing a lot on mental health, youth mental health, and doing check-ins with them regularly. And yeah, doing things like peace circles as well, if you are trained in peace circles, or even doing community peace circles. You don't have to be super skilled and trained in these, but just kind of creating that space where people can connect with their community and talk about, like, hey, I went through this, situation, and have other kids kind of share that, kind of creates that bond between them. And then, if you're ever in a situation where there is something happening, where you feel like some youth might be in danger of themselves to or others, making sure if it is safe to do so, you are able to step in and try to de-escalate. If you feel safe enough to do so, and if you feel skilled enough to do so, try to de-escalate the situation, whatever might be going on. If you hear people arguing, just kind of making sure you check your surroundings, check the environment. If it's not safe, don't engage. But if it is safe to do so, you step in and try to talk to them. Making sure you separate the people that are arguing. Some of the skills with de-escalation are separation, and kind of distraction in a way. So if you're with somebody, maybe you can separate the person and have a single conversation with them, and another person can have a single conversation with the other person, right? So to kind of de-escalate the situation, kind of listening to both of them, hearing them out, being compassionate, being patient as well, because, the adrenaline might be high, emotions might be high. So you just want to kind of make sure that they don't keep engaging with each other. And yeah, so just using empathy, other skills similar to that. Just making sure you check your environment first. We do not encourage people to step in if it is not safe to do so. So you leave that to your best judgment and be as safe as possible. But yeah, so let's see. Some other things you can do, keep your community off the streets, like I said, keeping them engaged in programs in their community, things in their community. So yeah, just kind of doing things like that can help. And hopefully, people learned a little bit from this. I hope you all have a good rest of your week. Thank you so much for tuning in and take care of your mental health. And I will see you all in the next one. Thank you. Bye. Good night.